So let's get started with a session that I kind of am calling PowerShell Undercover. It's not an after dark kind of session, but it's meant to kind of showcase some things that you as PowerShell scripters, people using PowerShell, may or may not know. And I'm betting some of these things are commands that you probably have never heard of, or don't fully understand why you should be using it or looking at it. So it's kind of the what you don't know. So a lot of these things I want to show you will do several things. One, it may make you more efficient in just working in PowerShell, just being able to get stuff done faster. It may add some touches to your PowerShell scripting that make it look more professional. Make it look, wow, this guy knows what he's doing. We should give him more money. Okay? The items I'm going to show you, and I'm going to be using Windows PowerShell, should work cross-platform in PowerShell Core and PowerShell 7. There are at least one of the things I'm going to show you is still being updated. So I don't know if at some point some of that stuff might change, but you can certainly try. The demos I'm going to show you, they should work cross-platform. All right, so that's pretty much it for the slides. So everything else is demo. Put on my old man glasses. So, how many of you write PowerShell scripts and you use write host to tell the user, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this? How many of you are guilty of that? I mean, use that. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, especially if you use write host and use a foreground or background color. That's probably the only safe reason to use write host. Otherwise, as my friend Don Jones will tell you, God kills a puppy. And I don't want you destroying puppies if you use write host. So if you use write host, use a foreground or background color so that the person running your command knows that that output is not the output of your command. It's just a message. Now, I'm assuming that you're using write host just to display a message and not the output of your command. If you are using write host as a result, I don't want to know right now because I've had nothing to drink yet. So let's, but as an alternative, as a better alternative, if you have a long-running script or function and you want to provide feedback to the person running it, write progress. How many of you have written scripts using write progress? All right, you guys can go. Good, because that's what you should be using. So I'm going to show you some things about write progress. So there's a command, and of course you need to make sure that you look at help. Look at full help and examples for write progress. I'm going to trust that you will all do that. You typically are going to use write progress in some sort of scripting environment. And write progress, the behavior of write progress, for those of you who maybe have no idea what I'm even talking about, write progress on some commands, you'll see you get that little cyan banner across the console with a kind of a graphical, kind of a text-based progress bar. That's write progress. Depending upon the PowerShell host that you are running in, that progress bar may look different. So it'll look different in Windows PowerShell versus the ISE versus PowerShell Core. So typically, for write progress to work, you need to define an activity and a status. And these basically will be the titles. I find it easiest with write progress to use a hash table to splat. Because often with write progress, you need to calculate some percentage or something to calculate that progress bar. So you're using write progress in a loop. And so if I just use a hash table, I just have to update just a few things each time through. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So here is hash table prog params. And I'm defining the activity and the status. Those are parameters for write progress. And I'm going to loop through the numbers 1 through 100. And each time through, I'm going to increment the count and have my own little code here to update the hash table. So the current operation, that's another parameter of write progress. And then I'm also going to calculate the percent complete. So I'm just basically doing the math to get a integer for a percentage. And then calling write progress, splatting my hash table. So that's the nice thing about splatting. The first two parameters stay constant. The other two parameter values, current operation, percent complete, get updated every time through the loop. And this is typically the way that you would use write progress. And then just so that it doesn't run too fast, I'm going to have a little sleep. So in the ISE, it looks like that. Yeah. And if I copy all this, let's paste it in the console. So you can see there's the activity. This is write progress, and the current operation is processing, and activity is calculating. Then the percent complete that I'm calculating, that gives me the progress bar. So if you have anything that works like that, that's a great thing to do. Now, the thing about the progress, you kind of need to know in advance how many things you're processing. Otherwise, there is an option, some parameters with write progress where you can specify like a time. But again, in your code, you have to make a best guess as to how much time is remaining. So typically, I find it easiest if I'm doing write progress. So let's say you're doing something with you're populating a bunch of new 0 through 65 accounts, and you've got a CSV file that you're importing with that data. So you know how many accounts you need to populate. So it's easy then to calculate how far you're going. So you basically do a for each loop, and in the for each loop, do the write progress, and then you're running your code under the hood, or kind of behind write progress. Now you can do some other fun things here. You can, for example, change the color of the progress bar. There's $host.privateData.progress background color, and you can give it a different color. Now this obviously only won't work in the IC because I don't have color, but it would work in the console. So what I've done, just as kind of a demo to see what this would look like, I have another script file here, if I can get to it. So this script's going to generate a report on my Hyper-V setup. But I have some code here at the beginning that if I'm running in the console host, meaning the PowerShell console, not the ISC, I'm going to change the background color of the progress bar to black. This is just more to show you what you can do, not necessarily that this is adding lots of value to the script. But you have to be careful because if you change that value, it's persistent. This is not affected by scope. Okay? So that's why I'm saving the current value of the background of the progress bar and then setting a new value. And then when I'm done with the script, I set it back. Because even though that $host looks like a built-in like a variable, it's actually like modifying the system. Okay? That's why scope doesn't come into play there. Those of you in my previous session. So there, if I'm not in the console host, if I run this IC, then that $prog BG background never gets set, so that line is ignored. If I'm doing it in the console host, then it does work. So here we can do this here. So there, so I've changed it just maybe to make it pop out more, make it a little more readable. You can do whatever you want.
Does that stay static if you have
Yeah, I mean, I have to write the code. So the question is does this stay static? It will stay static unless you have code that generates a new value for that percent complete or the time that it takes.
But it'll always stay in that spot of the console.
Yes, it always stays in that spot in the console. Yeah, the screen itself doesn't move. You can slide it, but it doesn't do anything.
How long does that change persist?
So this change only persists for as long as my script is running because I have code in it so that I set, so I look here,
If you didn't set it back.
it would stay for as long as my PowerShell session is open. So so the next time I restart PowerShell, if by chance I set the $host private data. So now you can see the progress colors are back to the original colors. When I was first working on this, I had in my head, it's just a variable. It's just like scope. No, but scoping doesn't apply. And so that's why I added the code to save the current value and then to set it back. Of course, if you always want your progress bars to look a certain way, like for yourself, you can just change that value and put it in your profile script, depending on what other color scheme you're doing. Some people go crazy with their color schemes and this weird fascination with dark themes. I just don't get it. Classic, yeah. I'll give you. Be careful here. All right, so here's another way that you can use write progress. I have a script here. I'm not even going to bother showing the script because we're short on time. That uses the Hyper-V commandlets and performance counters to find out what's the memory pressure on a given virtual machine. And then I've got code that uses write progress, and that progress, that percent complete, it doesn't always have to go from 0 to 100. You can just set whatever value you want. So I calculate from the performance counters how much memory pressure is on the VM and take that value and put that in for the percent complete. So I end up with kind of a graph. Now, in order for this to work, let's run this here. And I'm going to run a bunch of commands all at once just so that it starts the monitor and then run some stuff in the background to push the VM so it's got something to do here. And if you go through the script, you can see where I'm using write progress. So the value, the current activity gets updated, and I think I have this updating like every couple seconds. So there, so you can see it jumped up to 50, and the progress bar is adjusting as I need to. So here I'm using write progress, not really to show progress per se, but I'm using it kind of a poor man's graphical little counter. And I wrote this function so that I could leave it up for as long as I want if I just set it off someplace on a different monitor in a different PowerShell session and just kind of watch. I can even do a couple VMs. So if anything that's really critical, say, hey, I need to see what's going on.
So you can have multiple at once.
I think so. I think this version does. Can't do really like more than 2 or 3. And there's other fun stuff that you can do. I have a module up in the PowerShell gallery called PS Timers. You can install it, and it has a command called Start PS Countdown. And we'll do it here. Because you can also have with write progress, you read the help to do this, you can have a nested progress bar. So you can have I use this when I'm teaching classes, but come in the morning, say, hey, we're getting started at 9 o'clock, so I've got some information at the outer countdown, and then the inner countdown is just a fun little thing that loops through. You can see we're waiting for flying cars, personal jetpacks. But yeah, we're still waiting for flying cars and setting phasers to stun. The importance thing, initializing flux capacitors, all those things are all in there. So if you have really complex tasks, so let's say that you have, for my O365 thing, you may have an outer task that you're progressing of how many users you're going through, and then maybe a smaller task for each user. I've got something else I'm going to do, and that's going to take some time. And so you can have kind of that nested progress bar. So overall, this is where I'm at, and for this particular thing, this is where I'm at. And that makes your code, when a person runs it, look, wow, this person really knows what they're doing. Any questions on that? It does take a little time, a little practice. Yeah?
You can go deeper. You have like 3 progress bars.
I think that's as far as you can go. You could try. But I've only done, that's as far as I've ever tried to go. Because I think there's a limit to how wide that bar will go. If you need something more than that, then you need to probably build your own graphical tool with WinForms or WPF. And use the... in PowerShell Core, let's... Let's take the VM one. So here's PowerShell Core. Oh, I'm in the wrong directory. Well, here, we can do this. Let's just go back to my numbers. So yeah, in PowerShell Core, so this is PowerShell Core. This is Linux. This is an Ubuntu instance. Which doesn't like me to paste anything, but in the Linux, you don't get the color. It just shows as a bottom screen. Here. Let's see if I have another. There we go. So you can see there it's down at the bottom. So there's no color involved. You still get the progress, and the same parameters all apply, but it just displays a little bit differently. All right. Anything else before we move on? How many of you take advantage of PS default parameter values? How many of you have no idea what I'm talking about? Yeah. So in PowerShell, let's come back to here. In PowerShell, you run a command that has a parameter. PS default parameter values is a way of you saying, hey, whenever I run this command, unless I tell you otherwise, set this value for the parameter. For example, let's say that you have the Active Directory commandlets, and you know that every time that I run like get AD computer, I want to make sure I talk to this particular domain controller, because there's a parameter that will allow you to do that. I think it's -computer. You can then set a default value. So whenever I get AD user, it will automatically connect to the right domain controller. If you decide, I now need to connect to a different domain controller, then just -computer and put in the value you want. But otherwise, it will use the default value that you specify. So this can make your day work really easy because you don't have to remember, oh, yeah, I got to put in this value for it. So let me show you how this works. So I use PS default parameter values. It's a hash table that's built into PowerShell. If you have PowerShell open, you've never used it, and do type PS default parameter values, probably will get nothing back. But I'm going to go ahead and clear the ones that I use so I can start fresh. So right now, PS default parameter values has nothing in it. So the entry in PS default parameter values, the key is the name of the commandlet, like getSimInstance, colon, and then the parameter name. And then the value will be whatever default value you want. So I'm adding, so now PS default parameter values has a new entry. Whenever I run getSimInstance, the class name, unless I specify otherwise, will default to Win32 operating system. Because right now, and now I can do getSimInstance, and without having to specify anything else, now I can certainly specify a different class. That's no big deal. But that allows me to customize the command to give me kind of a default behavior that I want. Let's do another one here. So let's say I want and this one's going, I'm going to have to do this one. Because right now, if I do write host, it writes it in white unless I specify a foreground color. Well, I don't want to always have to remember to use the foreground color. So here's another way that you can add that value. So now, write host, the foreground color parameter has a default value of green. That saves me some extra having to type write host dash foreground color green.
Does that say just for that?
This is only for this PowerShell session. So if you need to use that, if you want this kind of stuff all the time, you would define that in your PowerShell profile script, which is what I do. So here's an example of the AD thing, because you can also use wildcards. So I can say any command that ends in AD something. So get AD user, remove AD object, whatever it is, the server, that's the name of the parameter, not computer, the server parameter, I'm going to always connect to DOM1. So now let me get my AD credential for Art Deco. And in fact, I can even set a default credential now. So now any AD command that I run will automatically connect to DOM1 and use the alternate credential. I don't have to remember to do that. Now, this is stuff that's not necessarily for scripting right now. This is meant for your daily interactive stuff you're banging out in the PowerShell prompt. Saves you now from having to do some extra typing. Now I can run, I think, hopefully, if my virtual machine is up and running, I can run get AD domain, and it'll connect using the credential, and it all works. Otherwise, I'd have to keep remembering, oh yeah, I got to connect to domain control and put in the credential. There we go. So just a little slow for the VM, but it works. Now, it's just a hash table, so let's look at it right now. You can use the hash table commands, for example, to remove an item, so I can get rid of the get some instance if I say, oh, I don't want that. You can also, if you need to temporarily, you can disable the entire use of PS default parameter values. So I can set, there's a disabled property that you can set, and you can also re-enable it. So then it would all work. It is possible to put these things into a script to take advantage, make scripting a little bit easier. So I have this little sample function that's going to create a markdown file from some output, and I'm using write host to provide some feedback instead of write progress. And I need to make sure that get sim instance that I always connect to the remote computer name. That keeps my code here, because I'm going to call get sim instance multiple times. I could splat, that would be another alternative, but I want to demonstrate the use of PS default parameter values and saving the colors. And the same type of thing like I did with the progress bar before, I save the current values and then reset them back. Because this, again, scope kind of gets in the way here. So if I run this file now, so I changed the foreground color of write host to cyan. So now I get the color that I want, and get sim instant defaulted to the computer name that I used, then it created the markdown file. If I decide later, you know what, oh, I don't like that it's cyan, maybe I want it to be a different color. Let's make it green. Now, yes, I know I could have just done write host throughout my script, dash foreground color, or I could have used splatting, but this is another option. Depending on what other things you might be doing in your script, using PS default parameter values as a scripting mechanism, there's some potential use there. So a lot of things I'm showing you is not that you have to use it, just be aware so when the situation arises, you go, oh, that would be a good use for PS default parameter values. And there is a whole help topic you can read about. Now, something that I think, and I talked about this in my workshop yesterday, and that is the use of verbose output. So I have a module, or some functions in a module I eventually will be using here. Like get info. You should have the right verbose lines. Because I have commandlet binding enabled in the function, that automatically gives me access to all the common parameters, like dash verbose, dash warning action, all those common things that you get with every other commandlet. The verbose output helps me keep track about what is happening in the script. But I only see it when someone runs the command with dash verbose. So the first line in the begin block is kind of boilerplate for me. I use this now all the time. Starting $magnification up my command. That will resolve to whatever the name of the function is. That way, if I'm running a command with dash verbose, I can see, oh, what command I'm running. Because I likewise do in the end block that I'm exiting. Because oftentimes I have commands that may be calling one function that's then going to call another function. And maybe I'm going to then call something else. And if they all have this starting and exiting, and you'll see this as I do the demo, and I run my command with dash verbose, I can see, oh, I'm starting this command, I'm doing this, doing this, doing this. Oh, now I'm jumping, I'm starting this command, doing this, exiting that command. So I'm back now. The reason I do all of that is really for troubleshooting and for debugging my script. Because I basically debug it as I write it. I'm happy to say I almost never have to go into the debugger, into VS Code or IC to fix my script. Because I do all this write verbose at the beginning. So I have, for example, let's look at in this function, in the begin block, if my command is adding a credential to the hash table, I have a little write verbose, adding credential, and also then specify the name. That way I can verify that the credential is right and see what the name is. In the process block, I'm creating some sim instances to each computer that gets passed through, so I have a write verbose statement that shows me what computer I'm working on. I also have, you can see it's pretty clear, the begin, process, and end little, little headers. That also helps me keep track about where that line might be in my function. As my functions get bigger and bigger, that I have found that to be helpful. So let's see this in use then. So this is a control script. All right? This is a script that basically is going to use tools from my help desk function to generate a HTML report for disk usage. You can put in whatever you need to in verbose output. So I have like basically a metadata section as a header. That tells me the date, the person running it, what operating system they're running on, what version of Powershell are they running as admin, what version of the storage module are they using. Because here's the thing. Let's say I write a script like this for the help desk to run. And then they call me and say, it's broken. It doesn't work. And they want to send it back to me. And I say, no, I don't want to talk to you. I gave you the tool. Oh, fine. Okay. If I give them a script that has all this verbose output, I tell them, okay, that's fine. Start transcript. Run the command just the way you were going to run it. Include dash verbose. The script runs. I see all the verbose output. I see whatever errors they're getting. Stop transcript. Send me the text file. I can then look in the text file and see all the information about what they're doing, who they are. So then I can see, oh, they're running the wrong version of the storage module. They need to update that, or I need to correct my script to take that into account or provide an error message. So I don't have to try to spend a lot of time trying to troubleshoot, okay, how come that doesn't work for you? And in this particular case, I'm also including a little header that shows me the time of day, so I can kind of keep track of how long it's taking to run each step. So the get volume report, that's the code, that's the command that's from my function, which also will have write verbose output. So let's see what this looks like. Let's clear the host. So there's some write progress too. You can see all the verbose output. And up at the beginning, then there's all that metadata information. But you can see I've got messages that say what I'm starting. I'm importing a module. All those functions get turned on. Because when you do dash verbose, any command that you run that also supports dash verbose automatically turns it on. So get sim instance, which I'm not using here, never mind. How does that work? So here is, right here, here's the begin block, starting volume report, or get volume report. That's from my module. And then I've got the process block, getting information drive C on Windows 10, and then it's looping through, adding data to the HTML fragments, and it goes to DOM1, then a server 1, then a server 2. And then I'm exiting that command, and then I'm adding the fragments, creating the report, and I'm done. So I have basically a report of what my script has done, what path it has taken, so then I can look at that later if I need to figure out why isn't something working or whatever you need. My recommendation, though, is put all that verbose output, do it as you are writing your script. Because the other benefit you get with all that verbose output is it can double as documentation, as comments. So instead of having to spend a lot of time putting tons of comments, you can use write verbose and, in essence, put the verbose output, that comment, to the screen. So when whoever runs that and they run it with dash verbose, then they see that. They only see it when they run dash verbose. Question? Yeah?
If you're passing multiple objects into a function, will that process block show multiple processes?
It depends on how you write your code. No, because you only have one process block. The process block processes anything that's piped into the command. So that function is written to take pipelined input, I think, or if it can take multiple values. I don't remember. This is running. So this is the command, get volume report, that it's actually running. So the control script is calling this function. And this function, yeah, is taking value from the pipeline. So my control script is pulling a list of computers from a variable that's in the help desk module, has a list of all the computers. Each one of them gets processed. And if we were to go back and look here, all right, so there's importing domain computer list, initializing a counter, querying Win10. So it must not be creating a sim session. I thought it was going to. But the pipeline, the process block is just in the function itself. So it's handling each computer name however I piped it in. I just can't recall off the top of my head how I set that up. I use verbose output all the time. It will make your life easier, especially if you're writing code for other people. Now, another command, and this one I really doubt many of you have ever even heard of, is called trace command. And we'll never use trace command. I guess I'll ask, just in case. Yeah. So trace command, in fact, let's see if this will work online. This is a complicated, developer kind of oriented command. You can use this to trace what PowerShell is doing when you run a command. This gives you some real deep under the hood feedback, and yes, it is kind of programmy, but it can help you figure out why is my command not working the way I think it should. And you can read then all of the examples there. This command works with this idea of a trace source. So you can trace things that are kind of related to your command, such as working with modules or parameter binding or the certificate provider. And it will, each of these providers has like a little thing that's watching for that it's tied to that thing. And if it sees that thing in your code, it logs it so that you can see what PowerShell is doing. It's kind of like a real-time debugging, except it doesn't stop you. It just shows you this is what I'm doing at a really low level. I encourage you to take some time to read the examples. So I'm going to clear the host here. So I'm going to run trace command, and I'm going to use the metadata, parameter binding, and commandlet providers. And I'm going to test what happens. Well, first of all, let me make sure that this even works. Okay, so the command works. But let's say it wasn't working, and I wanted to figure out what was going on. I'm going to do a trace command to those providers. The expression is the command that you want to test to see what's going on here. You can put the output to a file. I'm going to send it to the PS host, to the screen, so I can see what's going on. Hit F8. So you get all this debug output, but it doesn't stop you. So now you can see, if you can kind of read it here, it found bound named command line arguments for get service, and it's taking the SRV1 and applying it to computer name. It's trying to make it a string. It's then taking the array, it's checking positional parameters, creating the array, and so on. I'm not saying this is easy to uncover, but you have a way at least of recording what's going on. Then you get someone to help you say, okay, help me understand what's happening here. Because maybe you've written a function that you think should take parameter binding. You don't get any errors in the editor, so it looks like the code is right, but it doesn't work the way you think it should. Running your function and however you want to run it with trace command can make that, help you try to figure out, okay, oh, it's expecting this and I have it set to that. This is, again, this is definitely an advanced tool. So it's not something I would expect you all to be using right away, but keep it in mind. So when you get to that point and you're developing something more advanced and complicated, it doesn't work the way you think it should, trace command is the thing you have to remember. Oh, Jeff talked about trace command 5 years ago. That's what I want to use. You can also, if you really want to go all out, you can do trace command, and for the name, do all the providers. So I'm going to run that and save it to a text file. So there's my error because I can't find the foo. So all of this is everything that PowerShell is doing under the hood to basically parse your command and figure out what do I need to do in order to run it. And it gives you all that information. Then you can dig through it and figure out what's working or not working for you. The last thing I was going to talk about here is a module that's kind of built into PowerShell called PS Readline. PS Readline should be at version 2, and I know in PowerShell Core, I think it's still version 2. I know Microsoft is working on an update to this. So PS Readline has some really cool features. First of all, let's see what's in the module. PS Readline comes out of a, in the Linux world, I think there's a new Readline module or something to that effect that controls the behavior of your shell. And this is, in essence, a PowerShell port of that Linux-based tool set. So this can be used to control the colors of your output on the screen. It can have key handlers. It can persist history. let me give you a taste of some of this. So these are the options that it can set. Let's talk about history, since that's the first thing up here. You can configure with PS readline to tell PowerShell to persist your history to a text file. You can see that that's the default path. Normally when you run a command in PowerShell and run a bunch of commands, you close PowerShell. Next time you open up PowerShell, you no longer have access to that history. But maybe, yeah, I want that history. This will keep track. Every time you put in a command, it will save it to that text file. You can then search that text file to find a command that you ran in a previous session, maybe 3 days ago. You can configure, I think I have mine configured to 1,000, how many entries you want. So, and it's even because some of your PowerShell, if you got PowerShell Core and Windows PowerShell, it can use the same PS read line, which is kind of cool. So I was in like Windows PowerShell, ran a command, went to PowerShell Core, Control R to find the command, and I could run it again. Like, let's see if this will work. So let's do get service. We'll do WinRM. Now let's come over here. So now, so up arrow doesn't do anything. Control R. Yep, okay, so those aren't saving. Well, let's do it this way then. So sort of a completely new PowerShell session. So history, there's no history here. Control R. I just have to type some part of the command that I remember. Say, oh, I remember I did something with the fooby process. And if I had multiple ones, I could keep doing Control R until I find the one I want, and then hit Enter. So that history then will persist. So I can do Control R, get dash service, Control R, to find the command that I wanted. Now, one thing to be careful of is the PS read line, the history stuff, will save anything that you type at the console. So if you run a command like this, I'm running the CMD command line tool, and I put my password in plain text, that will save in the file. So you have to be, there is a potential security thing. Now in PowerShell, you almost never do, that'll never really happen if you're using get credential, because you get the pop-up. History won't capture that. And passwords are stored as secure strings, so you should be okay. But if you were doing something kind of old school where you have to put in something in plain text, notice that that can be handled, or that'll be captured. Now you can turn it off. You can tell it to save incrementally, which is saves every time. You can have it save whatever history you have when you're done with PowerShell. There are things you can do where you can add a history handler. You look at the help for this. We'll add a little code, and maybe you can put in some code and say, hey, if the string that I'm putting in, if it has the word pass or password or some regular expression pattern, then don't save it to the history file. So there are ways around that. You can have it filter out duplicates so that your history is just all unique ones, which is, I think, what I have set here. You can also use this with key handlers. So I have defined some of my own handlers. I think I can show you what they look like here. For example, I think I have that here. No, I don't, so I'm going to add them. I can define a handler, like, so whenever I press F12, it's going to run a function that I have defined here called capture screen. Oh, no, I'm sorry, function, the capture screen function is built into PS readline. That's how you can create them. Let's just look at the ones I have here. So, history list. If I do F7, maybe. There we go. So F7 has code behind it to take my history and display it in out grid view. My history is kind of big, which is why it took a while. I'm trying to remember. I haven't used some of these in a while. I don't have that. I haven't loaded that one. Yep. All right. So here's another way that I built here. I have some directory handlers. So let's do Alt F5. Oh, those are my handlers. I need the jump list. Control J. Oh, come on. I used to use this all the time, and I stopped using it, and okay. So I can create little keyboard shortcuts so I can jump around directories. Okay, so I got D, S, and U. Okay. So I can do Control J, D, jumps to my documents. I can, if I want to go to, let's go to, so now I just added Control J, S goes to my script. So you know what? I want to go back to that temp directory. Control J, T. So without me having to remember and type stuff, I can use the PS readline key handlers and add little jump shortcuts so I can quickly jump back to directories without having to do a lot of typing. I spend my entire day in PowerShell. So every little bit that saves me from typing, because most of the time if I'm typing, I'm going to screw it up anyway, so it takes like even longer. Anything that saves a few keystrokes and some frustration is a good thing. It adds up by the end of the week. Yeah.
How do you change those options, and do you have to change them every session?
Well, so what you'd have to do, and these user-defined ones that I built, I have a script that in essence is doing these lines here, where I'm defining the key handlers. So I have one here, which I don't think I have defined. Control Alt. No, that one's not. So I'm going to define a key handler using the key combinations Control Alt F. And it's going to be a function menu, and like you give a description, and you'll read the examples to see how to use the PS Console readline class. But basically all I'm doing is running get child item during the listing of the functions where names match certain things, and then sends it to out grid view. So it's kind of like a key macro. I forgot already, Control-Alt-F. If I did this right, this should work. PS read line is trying to do something right now. I may have to fix that one. PS read line works best in the Windows PowerShell console right now. It does not really work in the IC. Does not work very well in the in VS Code. The next version, I have been told, will be more compatible with other PowerShell hosts. I don't know whatever else they're going to do as well. But you can use that module that's in the help file, in the demo files, to see how you can define those things. I was going to try to go back here to my presentation. Oh, and that's the problem. That I have to go back and fix this. This particular version of the commands I'm using for PS read line were written for version 1 of PS read line, and then they came out with version 2, and I think they've changed some stuff, and I haven't gone back to fix some of the slightly older code. But this is all documented, and it's all open source, so you can go to GitHub. Let's see where it is. I think it's GitHub PowerShell PS read line. I'm going to take a wild stab that this is where it's at. Oh, I guess right. So here you can read about it, upgrading, usage. If you have issues or want to see what things people are having problems with. Love the new Microsoft, all this open source stuff. Because now you can see it's much easier. But having that PS read line, those key handlers, you can also use it to change the colors. For example, in Windows Terminal here, and I have since fixed it, in my Ubuntu session, the color for the parameter and operator was blank for some reason, which meant it was the same as the background color. So I could never see anything. And that was a real pain. So you can set a new, let's see, control. So let's set the parameter token to red. And I can do now set PS read line, and the new version takes a hash table and dash colors. So now, whenever any parameter is displayed in red. So you can use PS read line to adjust the colors of the different tokens, commandlets, operators, whatever. That way, and all those little color cues, you have them like in VS Code or the IC, helps you know, okay, this should be a command, this should be a parameter. Oh, I forgot the dash, so it doesn't know that that's a parameter, right? If that doesn't turn red, I know, wait a minute, I made a mistake, because that should be red, because it's a parameter. The colors kind of stay persistent. There's kind of a default setting So what I need to feed, well, let's find out. Let me close this. Let's open a new. No, I got two of these I have to. Parameter. Yeah, so this defaulted back to the original color that I had set. But you can always set these things in your profile that will make sure you always have the color scheme that you want. So these are just some things that I think will make your life easier. It can make you a better scripter, make your code look better, may help you figure out how come this isn't working the way I thought it to. Lots of things that people probably don't know about because they're not the really cool stuff. But if you need more help, I am around. You can find me on Twitter. That's the link to get all the material. Other questions before you run away and drink beer? That was perfectly clear. I'm going to call BS.
Just tweet at you later.
You can tweet at me later. I guess I need to remind you to do evals because they're all digital now, and unless you have a piece of paper in front of you, no one remembers to do them. Oh, surveys on the app. All right, so thank you. Go forth and spice.